I got the life of Kinemon, Foxfire Kinemon. So, a long time ago, in the land of Wano, there was a boy with yellow hair. He dyed his hair yellow because he was trying to be a badass, essentially. Yes, that's what he did. Um, and, he was, one of those, delinquents, right? You know, he wanted to make money for him and his girl, right? So, him and his friend, or were trying to do that, right? His friend Dendro, who was a little smarter, right? Um, they stole the mountain god's baby, which is just this giant fucking boar who will run through the Flower Capital and just destroy everyone, right? Otsuru, who was Kinemon's, boo thing, right, was about to die, right? She got ate by this mountain god. But lo and behold, guess who shows up? Odin shows up and cuts this mountain god in half. Boom! He leaves the Flower Capital, but Kinemon's just like, damn, I was weak. I couldn't save her, but you came and saved her life. You saved her. I want to learn how to be strong like you. I don't give what these people in the capital say. I want to follow you. So this began, Odin. This was the start of Odin becoming a daimyo, right? Of Curry, right? He had to travel the land, and Kinemon traveled with Odin, and they picked up Kandro, they picked up Izo and Okiku, they picked up Kawamatsu, they picked up Dogstorm and Cat Viper, they picked up uh, Ashura Doji, they picked up the whole group, right? And then they trained under Odin. But they were still, vagrants and, thieves and shit, right? At heart, right? Because, or that's just how they were, right? Because that's how they, came up. They stole from Lord Yasue in Hakumai. And he was like, wow, you come here to steal my treasure. You could die for shit like this, man. But I'll let you take that to Odin if you really needs it. If he really needs it, that's fine, But you guys have to get your life in order and become the people you're supposed to for him. You don't want to make your lord look bad, right? And they're like, no, we don't. That's why we came to take the money, and you know they started reading, they started learning calligraphy, art. They started to dress like samurai in the proper attire. They learned proper etiquette, table manners and all that. And they held each other to a high standard. And it was Kinemon mostly, he was kind of like the leader of the retainers and shit, right? Even back then. Now, he wasn't the best at swordsmanship, I wouldn't say that, but he was still there, right? But eventually Odin left the island and he was like, damn, I didn't want him to leave the island. I understood he wanted to leave this island, but he has a responsibility to his people, and he was kind of pissed off about that, but he still, respected it, or he had to respect it because Odin was already gone. Now, when Odin came back, Kinemon enlightened him. He was like, the capital is now under Orochi's command as Sukiyaki fell ill and we don't know what happened to him. He's been, since left, right? And you were supposed to, succeed him, right? As the Shogun of Wano. And he's like, oh my gosh, now I have to fix this as soon as I come back. Odin says that, right? Gets back. Kaido is like, I can fight you right here, or you can just, go dance in the streets like a fool, and we'll, just stay here in the Flower Capital. You won't have to worry about anything, Orochi can keep his position, and, nothing to see here. But then, as years pass by, right, 5 years pass, and then, Odin hears about, Udon prison and his people being, taken there, to work, slave labor. Kaido building up an army, forcing certain people to side with him and join him. Um, the daimyos who don't submit to Kurozumi Orochi are now being hunted down. He didn't like that. So then he mounted an attack. Kinemon was a part of that, guard. They all went on to attack, but guess what? Odin was defeated, and then the next day he was sent to be boiled in oil. He was like, open up the land of Wano, and he, threw them away so they could, run to Kuri and save, his son and daughter. He got there. Toki said, I'll send you to the future 20 years. Kinemon, um, Kinemon, Momonosuke, and Kanjuro. They all got sent to the future, right? They're like, they go to the future and they seen their graves. And then they find the people who waited those 20 years, and they were like, we've waited 20 years, but you're finally here. This is a sign from, Lady Toki that this is going to happen. We're going to take our home back from Kaido and Orochi's clutches. And he's like, yes, we will. And we will come back with, allies and shit like that. So they, embarked. Raizo was in, Zou. And then Kanjuro was taken by Doflamingo. And then also, Momonosuke got taken to Punk Hazard, with some other children. He then ate the Azure Dragon fruit. It's the knockoff version, though. Momonosuke did. Kinemon had the Garb fruit, but then he got cut down by Trafalgar Law. All that happened. Straw Hats met him. Sanji met him. He was like, I really need to get back to my son. Kinemon's calling Momonosuke his son right now. And he's like, yes, we'll get you back to your son. And he's like, we really need to get back to Wano too. And Sanji's like, we can help you out. Luffy is also on board with that idea, as Trafalgar Law and him also made a pact to take down Kaido, so it all worked out. After Caesar was defeated, they went to Dressrosa, and in Dressrosa, he was like, we have to find our comrade Kanjuro. Kanjuro is in, Dressrosa. To find Kanjuro, they went around. He was actually, sent with the toys, right? He was sitting, somewhere. His paintbrush in tow, and he was like, okay, we need to stop this, birdcage. He was on the island still. Half of the Straw Hats left, right? They went to Zou. That was Sanji, Nami, Brook, and Chopper. And everybody else was in, Dressrosa. Kinemon got to Zou. That's when the beans are spilled to the Straw Hats. He's like, yes, Momonosuke is our lord, and I'm actually his retainer. I'm not his father. But I needed to tell you that so it wouldn't, get too close to us. But at this point, it was like, I have to let you know because you need to help us defeat Kaido. And he's like, yes, Odin was killed a long time ago by Kaido, and it's like fresh in Kinemon's mind, right? Because he was sent, 200, or not 200, 20 years into the future, right? He was sent 20 years into the future. Kinemon goes with Trafalgar Law back to Wano. There they, wait for the Straw Hats to show up. Luffy's group with Sanji, Nami, Brook, and Chopper in tow, right? They get there and, they're like, yes, we plan on attacking Onigashima. We have our allies. They have the crescent moon on their heel. Those are our allies, right? He's looking for all of the 9 scabbards, the retainers of Odin that are scattered throughout Wano. They find and meet, Ashura Doji, and he's like, it's been a long time, but, we're finally here. That shit's fresh in my mind. For you, that happened 20 years ago, but for me, it happened yesterday, compared to what, it was for him, right? I'm here to, make this shit right. We're going to get our country back. we're gonna make Momonosuke the shogun like it should be. And they were like, yes, we've waited for so long. The day of, the raid of Onigashima, Kanjuro actually comes out as a traitor, and then Kyoshiro is actually Denjiro in disguise. For 20 years he was, waiting, serving Orochi, wishing he could slit his throat, but waiting that whole time, you know, gritting his teeth and bearing it, right? But now it was time. Okiku was heartbroken that Kanjuro was an enemy, but then Kinemon was like, no, we have to cut that bitch down. We have to find our real enemy. That's Kaido. Let's go. Boom, boom, boom. They were running through the fucking, panels, right? Oh my God, the raid on Onigashima, that shit's heat, y'all. You gotta get to that. Ran up there. He didn't give a fuck. He didn't care that Kaido was, strong or anything. We're 8 men strong. We'll run that shit on you. We have Straw Hat Luffy with us. God damn it, we're taking our shit back today. Boom! They hit Kaido. They all stab Kaido, right? Boom! He goes into his dragon form. And they're fighting on the rooftop. They're pulling out all the stops. He uses Flame Run. He cuts his fire attack in half, but it's still not enough. He actually reopens the wound that Odin placed there. He used Paradise Tosca on him, right? Boom. The move that Odin used, right? He was, doing that, but it only decreases health bars by 1% because this is Kaido, right? Luffy enters the rooftop later, and Kinemon's on the ground, almost dead. He's like, we tried, but please, you have to. And Luffy, he turned the fuck up after that. And the fight went on, Luffy versus Kaido, right? He went down into the lower levels of Onigashima, and they were, waiting, they were recovering. But then Kanjuro was there. Kanjuro, conjured up a fake Odin. Ashura Doji gave his life to protect them, Then, he was fighting against Kanjuro. He had to cut Kanjuro down because he wasn't defeated yet. He's like, God damn it, Kanjuro, you bastard. Ashura died. You betrayed Odin. This shit needs to fucking stop. And he handled that shit. But he was still almost dead, right? Because Kaido came down there and, fucked his ass up a little bit. Kinemon, after all that happened in Wano, right? He was, the smoke moved and they were like, wait, that's the 9 scabbards, Odin's retainers. And then another young man appeared, that nobody knew. And they were like, wait, that's our boy Momonosuke. Yes, look at this young man. He's your shogun now. It's not Kurozumi Orochi. We have won our freedom, and our country is ours again. Boom. They thanked Luffy. They were like, thank you so much. And they were with Luffy for a long time, since episode 600 and something, man. All the way until the end of Wano. 1,800 episodes, right? Or, 400 episodes basically, from 600 to 1,000, right? He was with Luffy for a long time. And he was like, anytime, we'll be there for you, that kind of thing, because you were there for us. That's the story of Kinemon. He probably will show up for Luffy, in the future. There's no doubt in my mind they'll do that, But that's the story of Kinemon, Foxfire Kinemon. Be cool, go on the corner, and let me know what you think about this character in the comments.